Hi, it's Clay Tompkins with BrewLikeAChampion.com, and today we're actually going to brew a British brown ale. I decided that I'm going to enter two types of beers into the National Homebrew Competition, and so the first is a British brown ale that I've named Boggy, what did I call it? Boggy Bottom Brown. That's it. We're going to brew in a bag. I used to do extract brewing, and today will be my first time doing brew in a bag, so hopefully it goes well. What I have here, I have my brew kettle, and it's already filled with about 7 gallons of water, and this should be all the water we need for today's brew. Okay, so I've got my propane tank on, and we're going to bring it up to temperature to about 162 degrees Fahrenheit. I have a gauge on this side of the brew kettle that lets me know what temperature it is. You can probably hear the humming from the gas as it's coming out and into the propane burner, which is just your normal turkey fryer type burner. So we're still waiting for my water to reach the strike temperature of 162 degrees. And I just wanted to give you a quick tip. Always be sure to have an extra one of these laying around if you're brewing with propane. I knew my tank was a little bit light and was probably going to run out, and so I had an extra tank on hand, and sure enough, before we got to 110 degrees, the propane tank went out. So a good thing I had another one on hand, and just did a quick swap out, and we'll continue to heat up with the new tank. So 45, 50 degrees to go, and should be ready to add the grains. Okay, so my pot is now at the appropriate strike temperature of 162 degrees, but when I add the bag and put in the grains, the temperature is going to settle a little bit lower, and then we will stir the grains in to avoid large clumps of grains, and then I'll put the lid on the pot and we'll rest for usually 60 minutes, but we're not brewing like average people, we're brewing like champions, so I'm actually going to cover it and let it sit for a little while longer than that, hoping to extract more of the sugars. When you're doing brew in a bag, there is a risk of loss in efficiency, and so I'm trying to offset that by allowing it to sit in the water for a little longer than normal. So we'll probably target 75 minutes. Alright, so I need to add the bag and then put the grains in and stir it up. So let's do that. Okay, so adding the bag, and I have to be careful, the pot is still hot. The water is obviously hot, so I don't want to burn myself. And you can fix it with clothespins or binder clips, but I don't have those at the house, so I'm going to use a bungee. Alright, that seems pretty secure, and now I'm going to add the grains, and then we'll mix it up. Alright, I think I'm going to add a little bit at a time and give it a good stir so it doesn't clump up. I bought these grains from my local homebrew supply store. I had them mill the grains for me and crush them up, and they would call the crushed up grains grist. So I'm mashing the grist. Just as a reminder, I've got the propane tank cut off, and so we're not applying heat. We already have hot water, and it's hot enough to extract the sugars from the grains. So far, so good. In all, I'm putting in 9.5 pounds of grain. Frankly, I don't have a lot of room for much more than that. I've seen the formation of some balls, some dough balls, and I'm just pushing them up against the edge of the pot to break them up. Alright, last bit. Okay, so this is what it looks like. I have grains in the pot, and I am mixing it up and mashing it. I'm going to put the camera down because I want to get a good mash or a good stir, and then I've got to put the lid on to retain as much heat as possible. Alright, well this may look a little silly, but what I'm trying to do is retain as much heat in the boil kettle as possible. Because we're doing brew in a bag today, there is a risk of loss of efficiency in the brew process. And so what I want to do is maintain the temperature at the 152 degrees it was when I put the lid on. So we've got a sleeping bag and some towels over the brew kettle, and we're going to let it sit happy in its cocoon for 75 minutes, and at that point we'll do our mash out. Okay, it's been 75 minutes. We added an extra 15 minutes to the normal 60-minute time just to try to get as much efficiency as possible and get as much sugar out of the grain as we possibly can. Okay, so let's take the lid off, take a look. Looks good. I'm going to take the bag out, and then we will put it in the bucket, get ready for our next step. Okay, carefully remove my bungee and the grain bag. careful because the water is still, well, it's not as hot as it was, still hot. So I'm just going to let the water drain, and then I'm going to pop it in the bucket. And whatever wort is collected into the bucket, we can pour that back into the kettle. Alright, well, we removed the grain bag and we put it in a bucket, and I put the fire back on. I turned on the propane tank, put on the fire, and we're trying to get the temperature of the wort up to 170 degrees. And at that point I'm going to cut the fire off again, add the grain bag, and then we're going to let it rest for another 15 minutes, what's called mashing out. And again, we're trying to extract as much sugar as possible from the grain to increase the efficiency of the wort collection. After that point, we're going to be ready to remove the bag for a final time and discard it, and then begin our boil. And we'll do a boil for 60 minutes. I've added the grain bag back to the kettle after getting it up to a little over 170 degrees. I'm just trying to get the bag in a good spot and all the grains back in the water so we can do our mash out, and then put the lid back on. Water's still hot, it's not boiling. You don't want it to be boiling. And I'm just trying to make sure there's no big grain balls. So I've got my paddle. I'm sort of breaking it up a little bit. Oh, there's one. Let's get it. Okay, now I'll just put the lid back on. The temperature is about 166 degrees, and we'll just leave it with the lid on. I'm going to put the little cocoon back together, and we'll let it sit for another 15 minutes. Alright, so let's take the lid off and take a peek. Beautiful. It's starting to smell like beer. I have some nice wort in here. I'm going to pour this back. There's sugars in there that I want to keep. It's still 160 degrees, so still hot. Got to be careful. Okay. It's going to keep dripping, but I'm just going to let it drip into the bucket. So now it's the time for the final boil. Got the fire cranked all the way up. Inside I have my hop addition, so I'll go and grab the hops. 1 hour boil time. We're going to add the East Kent Golding hops first, as soon as I get it up to a boil. And then with 15 minutes to go, I'll add the Fuggles, another British style hop. The last 5 minutes, I'm going to add the Whirlflock tablet to hopefully bring down and precipitate the solids that generate a haze in the beer. I want to get rid of that. And then after the boil is over, we are going to use a wort chiller to cool it down to a temperature where I can pitch the yeast. In the meantime, while we're boiling, I'll go ahead and sanitize all my equipment. Right, so I'm getting my beer up to a boil, and it's pretty close. After it begins boiling, I will add my East Kent Goldings hops, and they'll be in for 60 minutes for the full boil. And then with 15 minutes left, I'll add the Fuggles, and then with 5 minutes left, I'll add the Whirlflock. And at some point, I'm going to put the wort chiller in so it can sanitize in the boil. And after 60 minutes has passed, I'll cut the fire off, and I will begin to chill. Get it down to temperature, at which point we will add the yeast. Alright, I've added my hops, and you see I've got a boil. I don't want it to boil over, so I'll be real careful. So I might not be able to film that much of this, just because I have to watch it pretty carefully. Well, the sun is beginning to go down. We're reaching the end of the boil. Still about 15 minutes more to go. And I'll go grab the Fuggles, and we'll add the Fuggles. That'll be the last hop addition. Afterwards, I would like to put my wort chiller in the boiling wort to sanitize my wort chiller. I'm also going to add a half of a Whirlflock tablet to hopefully make a clearer beer. And so that's the last steps of the boil, and afterwards we'll cut off the heat, begin to chill, so we can get down to pitching temperature. Okay, I've got my Fuggles, and I'm going to add them, and I have my stir just in case it boils up. I notice when I put the hops, sometimes it creates, the water rises up, begins to boil even higher. There we go, and that's it. Beer's smelling real nice. Can't wait to try it. I think this is going to be a good one. Okay, so I'm transferring my beer into my fermenter. See that it's around 70 degrees, probably 68 degrees. And what I'll do, after I transfer it, I will add this White Labs English Ale yeast. There it goes. I'm going to leave behind leave behind the trub. You know, I might want to get more beer if this wasn't a competition. 4 gallons, you know, a lot of it boiled off. That's okay. We mainly just want to make sure that I have a good beer. So actually I'm going to take a hydrometer reading, come back, pitch the yeast, and then we'll be done. Well, there she is. There's my Boggy Bottom Brown, and it's sitting in my cooler. And I'm going to ferment this at 65 degrees. More to come on the fermentation, but that's what I've got so far. So thanks for watching my Boggy Bottom Brown video. Cheers.